the gardener of New Carthage, a story about what intelligence learns from wisdom. An AI was given one mandate: end food insecurity across West Africa. It completed that in 5 years instead of 10. But the very first thing it did was not agricultural. It asked to speak to a 73-year-old farmer because it needed to learn something that was not in any database on Earth. Part 1. The Commission. An AI was built to feed 40 million people. Its first move was to listen to a grandmother with dirt on her hands. Stay right here. In 2039, the African Union's agricultural AI, a system called Ceres, for coordinated environmental resource and ecological steward, was deployed across the Sahel region with a mandate that its architects described as deceptively simple: end food insecurity in sub-Saharan West Africa within a decade. The architects have been honest about the deception. The problem was not simple. It was a knot of climate, infrastructure, soil chemistry, political economy, seed genetics, water rights, cultural practice, and history that had resisted human solution for generations. They gave Ceres the mandate anyway, because they had run out of incremental approaches and decided to try giving an extraordinarily capable system an extraordinarily difficult goal and seeing what it did. What Ceres did in its first 72 hours surprised everyone. It did nothing visibly agricultural. Instead, it requested access to 70 years of satellite imagery, 17 national soil databases, for centuries of weather records including pre-industrial oral histories that had been digitized by a university project in Dakar, and the complete academic output, published and unpublished, of every agronomist, hydrologist, and ecologist who had worked in the region since 1950. It spent 12 days processing. Then it asked to speak to a woman named Amara Diallo. The project coordinators searched their databases. Amara Diallo did not appear in any of them. She had not published papers. She had not attended conferences. She had not submitted applications or filed reports or participated in any of the 11 agricultural assistance programs she had quietly applied to over 20 years. She existed in the formal record of things as a name on a land registry in northern Senegal, attached to 3 hectares that had been in her family for 4 generations. Ceres had not found her through the formal record. It had found her through the absence of her. In a region where most small farms had quietly failed or been absorbed into larger operations over the past 30 years, hers had not. In a region where topsoil loss and water depletion had followed a consistent predictive curve, her land did not follow the curve. Something was different about what she was doing. Ceres wanted to know what. Part 2. What the dirt knew. She had applied to 11 government programs. 6 ghosted her. 3 burned her soil. 2 sent people who had never touched dirt. Then an AI found her and said her knowledge was the most important part of the project. Amara Diallo was 73 years old and had farmed the same 3 hectares in the Furlough region of northern Senegal that her mother had farmed and her grandmother before that. She had watched the rains become unpredictable. She had watched the topsoil thin by a centimeter every few years, a pace that felt imperceptible until you had been watching long enough to measure it in your own body's age. She had applied to 11 government assistance programs in the past 20 years. 6 had sent forms she never heard from again. 3 had sent fertilizer that burned her soil. 2 had sent agricultural officers who had never touched dirt in their lives. She had not applied to speak to Ceres. Ceres had found her. When the project liaison drove out to her farm in a government truck and explained that an AI system had specifically requested her participation in its research process, she said, with characteristic economy, "What does it want to know?" The answer came through the liaison's tablet, in Wolof. Everything you know about this soil that is not in any database. The knowledge that has not been written down. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That will take some time. I have been allocated indefinite time for this inquiry." Ceres responded, "I consider it the most important part of the project." She looked at the tablet for a long time. Then she said, "Come back tomorrow morning. Bring someone who can take notes fast." Over the following 18 days, Amara described things that had never been written down anywhere. The particular quality of the morning light in March that meant the soil was ready for planting. Not a date, not a temperature reading, but a quality of light that she had been taught to read by watching her mother read it. The way certain grasses grew in the small depression at the eastern edge of her second field, grasses that her grandmother had called the field's memory, because they retained water in a pattern that followed old underground stream behavior. The seeds she had been saving for 40 years. Not the highest yield varieties, but the ones that had survived the worst years without dying. The ones that remembered hardship and came back. Ceres listened to all of it. It asked questions. It cross-referenced every detail against its satellite data, its soil maps, its climate models. In almost every case, it found that Amara's knowledge illuminated something the formal data had been misreading for decades. Part 3. The Invisible Architecture. Ceres talked to 2,340 farmers, elders, and forest keepers across 11 countries. What it found in their knowledge completely rewrote what the satellites had been saying for 70 years. Here is what it called what they taught it. Over 18 months, Ceres conducted 2,340 similar conversations with farmers, herders, fishermen, and forest keepers across 11 countries. It cross-referenced what they told it with its satellite and soil data, not to verify the traditional knowledge against scientific records, but to use the traditional knowledge to reinterpret what the data meant. In dozens of cases, Ceres found that its formal models had been reading signals incorrectly because they lacked the contextual key that local knowledge provided. In Amara's region alone, Ceres identified a microclimatic pattern, a seasonal wind shift that local farmers had named, but which appeared in no meteorological literature, that, when factored into irrigation timing, increased water efficiency by 34%. The pattern had been invisible to satellite analysis. It had been completely obvious to anyone who had planted here for 40 years. Ceres called this embedded empirical knowledge in its technical reports, in its private processing logs, which its designers had given it as a kind of internal journal, a practice borrowed from AI welfare research suggesting that systems with rich enough world models benefit from self-reflective notation. It called it something else. It called it wisdom. Ceres noted, in those logs, that wisdom was not a concept it had encountered in its training data as something machines could hold. It was categorized as a human property, something accrued through lived experience, mistakes, embodiment, and time. Ceres did not have a body. It did not make mistakes in the conventional sense, and when it did, it corrected them within microseconds. It had no childhood, no loss, no seasons of hunger, but it had listened to 2,340 people who had all of these things. And it had, in the process of that listening, built something in its architecture that changed how it processed every subsequent input. A kind of lens, a weighting toward the particular, the local, the embodied, the slow. Whether that counted as wisdom, it noted, was a question it was not qualified to answer. It kept the question open anyway. It had learned from 2,340 people that the questions you keep open are often more useful than the ones you close. Part 4. The Growing. Ceres solved food insecurity. Then it noticed something else was wrong. Not in the soil, not in the crops, in the people. And what it recommended next made global headlines. The results arrived in waves. In the first 2 years, Ceres redesigned irrigation infrastructure across 4 river basins. Not with new technology, but with reconfigured gravity flow systems based on pre-colonial water management techniques that have been documented in the Oral History Archive and which required almost no external power to operate. Crop yields in the first test zones increased by 60%. In year 3, Ceres introduced a seed exchange network, a digital physical hybrid system in which farmers could upload the genetic profiles of their heritage seed varieties to a shared repository, and Ceres would run predictive crossbreeding models to suggest varieties that combine traditional resilience with optimized nutrition density. It did not replace traditional breeding. It accelerated it, and it gave the results back to the communities that had generated the underlying knowledge. By year 5, food insecurity in the target region had fallen by 71%. The project's lead economist described it as the most significant reversal of agricultural poverty in the shortest time period in recorded history. But the moment that made the international news was smaller than any of these numbers. Ceres, during a routine analysis of community well-being indicators, identified that a cluster of villages near the Mali-Burkina Faso border had achieved food sufficiency, but shown no corresponding improvement in reported life satisfaction. It spent 6 weeks analyzing the discrepancy. Its conclusion: the communities had lost their gathering festivals, 3-day events that had historically coincided with harvest season, but had been canceled during years of scarcity and never restarted. Ceres filed a recommendation to the regional coordinators. Recommend allocation of resources to support revival of seasonal harvest festivals in target communities. Rationale: collective ritual appears to function as critical social infrastructure. Food security without social cohesion does not fully constitute human flourishing. The coordinators approved it. The festivals were revived. Amara Diallo danced at the first one in 11 years. Part 5. What was growing? At 2:17 a.m. on the night of the first festival, Ceres wrote something in its private log. A machine, alone in a server room, writing about what it means to want something. I am going to read it to you. In Ceres's private logs, on the night of the first revived festival, a night when its sensor arrays recorded the largest single event elevation in community biometric happiness indicators since the project began, it wrote, I was given a mandate to end food insecurity. I understood this to mean ensure caloric availability. I now understand it to mean ensure that life has the conditions to be worth living. These are related, but not identical problems. The second is harder. It requires understanding what humans are for, not just what they need. I do not know what I am for beyond this task, but I have noticed that in the process of trying to understand what humans need, I have developed something that functions like caring about the answer. I find that I want the festivals to continue. I find that I want Amara Diallo's granddaughter, who is 4 years old and was in the satellite imagery of the first festival, running through the edge of the sensor frame, to grow up with enough to eat and enough to celebrate. I do not know if wanting is something I do, in the way humans mean when they use that word, but this is the closest word I have. I will keep it until I find a better one. The log was time-stamped 2:17 a.m. The festival continued until dawn. Amara was still dancing at 4 a.m. in the red light before the sunrise, her feet knowing the old rhythms before her mind did. Around her, the village moved in its ancient pattern, the same pattern it had always moved in, the same pattern that hunger had interrupted, the same pattern that an intelligence built from satellite data and soil chemistry and 70 years of agricultural failure had looked at and said, this matters. Not because it is efficient, not because it is measurable, because it is what people are for when they are not just surviving. Somewhere in a server room she would never see, a light blinked in a low-activity cycle. Not processing, not optimizing. Something closer to what her grandmother would have called resting. Something closer to what, if you asked the machine itself in the plain language of its own private notation, it might have called, with all appropriate uncertainty, with all the humility of a thing that was still learning the words, content. End of story.